Quit whining.
That's the compassionate pastor in Micah coming out.
This is the One Accord Podcast, and we are back together again for another episode in our Biblical Theology Project. This time we are talking about Joshua chapters 7, 8, and 9, and I am so thankful for these brothers and their time to talk through these things with me, so let's go ahead and introduce them one by one. First and foremost, I guess, let's bring in Brother Micah. I usually say last but not least, but now we got first and foremost, so I guess first isn't always foremost should be the way that we're saying it. But anyway, Brother Micah, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. You may be introducing me first. I'm certainly not foremost here. But no, I'm doing well. Good day of ministry yesterday. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes preaching's a strange business because sometimes you feel that you preach to yourself more than other times. Yesterday was a day where I felt that I needed the message a lot. And I mean, I need every message that I preach, but sometimes you feel that you need the message a lot. So yesterday was one of those days for me. So I was encouraged by the ministry of the word, even though it was, me doing it or God doing it through me. But
as I'm in the same quote unquote business as you, I know that there have been some messages sometimes when maybe it's even a harder or heavy message. And I tell people, hey, you're only been hearing this for like 30 minutes so far. I've been wrestling with this for hours and hours this week. So if you think it's hard on you, pray for me. Anyway, Brother Greg, how you doing today?
Doing well. Yeah, good weekend. Yeah, I'm here. Let's go.
All right. Short and sweet. I love it.
He's ready to fight.
Brother Eric, how about you? How are you doing today?
Hanging in there. I'm a little bit under the weather. Been kind of dragging lately, but nothing, nothing real serious. Just an annoyance that's kind of slowing me down a bit. But I'm
quit whining.
Yeah,
that's the compassionate pastor in Micah coming out.
No, he's right.
As it turns out, his message yesterday was on compassion. I don't know. That's what a coincidence.
Do as I say, not as I do. But no, I'm ready to get into it.
Well, hopefully it won't curb your enthusiasm too much for the topic matter. But I am looking forward to talking about this with you guys. Before we dive right in, just in case this is your first time watching the show, all of us who are about to engage in this conversation in this show have read through these chapters. But if you're not familiar with this content, we would encourage you to maybe press pause and go ahead and read through it on your own. That way you're familiar with every single word that's in this section of Scripture, because we're not going to be able to talk about everything. We're just going to mostly talk about what stands out to us or things that maybe we've been talking about as we go. And so I'll get us started from chapter 7. Right in the beginning here, there's some unexpected defeat. We've kind of been at least prepared for why that's going to happen. But then in verses 5 through 9, we get this response from the people and this prayer from Joshua. I'm just curious kind of to get your guys' thoughts as you read this. They're reacting to something that we kind of, at least as the narrative was building, maybe could have seen coming. But their response, just curious to see how you guys read it and what you think about it.
Well, as I was reading this, the prayer sounded to me almost like what you would expect. It wasn't. I really wasn't surprised by it. It sounded similar to some other prayers that we've read before. God, why did you just bring us here to essentially to die? Now, it's important though to keep in mind that at this time Joshua didn't know the cause of of all these things, and so it's almost like he assumed, well, we're in God's will, we're doing God's will, and we should get the victory. But then he found out that was not the case. There was sin involved. So it's an understandable prayer if you're assuming that you're doing what God wants you to do, and then all of a sudden everything crashes and burns. I don't know. That's the impression I got. Maybe there's some more insightful responses, but that's what struck me as I read it.
Do you find it interesting, before the other guys give their opinion, that his assumption was that God was the one that was being unfaithful? That somehow God had tricked them or something like that? That he didn't immediately think, all right, what do we do? Somebody's done something wrong. But that he went to thinking God, why'd you do this? You're not delivering us.
Right. That was basically my thought was, well, because they're just about to take the land. God's already told them, I'm going to be with you. You're going to defeat your enemies. I'm going to give you great victories. Of course, there was always that condition. You have to obey me, though. So I think, going into it, if you assume that the conditions met, if you assume that you're obeying God and that Israel's obeying God, then you have a good reason to expect that you're going to get the victory. When you don't, you get a prayer like this.
But the question is, what should his assumption have been? Like,
well,
should
sure,
his
of course.
assumption have been, we've disobeyed somewhere and I'm unaware of it? Or that God was being unfaithful? And once again, like, you see this, Joshua is kind of echoing the previous complaints of the children of Israel. He ascribes motive. He ascribes motive to God. And this is one of those areas where it just shows us the best of the merely human leaders that are, dead, that are fallen men. They're not the serpent crushing seed of the woman. They're not the Messiah, because Joshua is, I think Joshua is saying something that's actually sinful here. He's ascribing motive to the Lord, deception to the Lord. And there's even a reversal of the promise in chapter 1 that happens here. Joshua says that God's brought them over to give us into the hands of the Amorites. The promise in chapter 1 of Joshua was that God would give their enemies into their hands. Like he's saying you've been deceptive. This is kind of like Joshua jumps immediately to the wrong conclusion here. And maybe that's why God responds so harsh. God doesn't even entertain it. Like, he says, "Get up."
Well, that's what I was gonna say.
Get up, get off your face. Israel has sinned. He doesn't even entertain the complaint. So I think that there's a lot to learn from Joshua's prayer there.
Yeah, and I think I'll try to be as generous as I can to Joshua. I think it's understandable, though. Like, is he wrong? 100%. Should he have assumed? Yeah, he should have just intuitively known. But as a guy not maybe all that much different than Joshua, I go, man, like I could see myself there, right? It's not an impossible situation to see myself in the same thing. And so, man, here's an opportunity for Joshua to grow. Here's an opportunity for Joshua to learn to rely on God. As a new leader, right? This Joshua's just figuring this stuff out for himself for the first time. And so, I don't want to be the one to, let God beat up on Joshua if God wants to beat up on Joshua. I don't want to pile on that because, like, man, I've been in those new leadership positions where, Greg, you should have known. You're right. I should have. It's 100% of me. I should have known, but I didn't. And so,
I completely agree. And as I read this, I kind of look at Joshua as almost like he's a little bit of a whiner. I appreciate your desire to be gracious to Joshua. I'm not trying to pick on people. And I've said before, I'm glad my life isn't the one that's recorded in Scripture for people to analyze and dissect and make fun of or whatever else. So I'm not doing this to beat up on Joshua. But I recognize in him this tendency. In this particular case, they were told, you're going into the land. As Micah just said, they were given this promise. I'm delivering your enemies into your hands. I will be with you. I will not forsake you. And then all of a sudden, everything goes wrong. And so I know when I look in my own life, often when I start questioning God, it's because I'm questioning because the outcomes didn't go the way that I anticipated, but I didn't have some clear revelation like they did. They did have a clear revelation of what these outcomes were supposed to be. And now it was so different. Well, why don't your assumptions then go to the fact that instead of God being unfaithful, maybe we've done something? And why don't you have a heart of humility and repentance? Instead of coming to God saying, attributing motive to God, saying, God, you did this to harm us or to destroy us. God, have we been unfaithful to you? If so, show us our error. And so the narrative set us up for that right at the beginning, saying, and they acted unfaithfully, and Achan did this thing, and then we get to see their response. So the narrator kind of pulls back the screen a little bit. But sorry, Greg, go ahead.
I was say, at least as far as to destroy us, I see that more as a question, and maybe it's a question with an accusation built in. But if I'm Joshua and I'm doing the best that I can, and I've got my nose to the grindstone, or however you want to say that, and I'm going along, and somebody downstream of me completely biffs it and I know nothing of it. Like, again, not right, but understandable.
That is part of the role of leadership, though. His assumption.
It is.
Right. I mean,
assuming that everyone else is going to mess up beneath
God
you.
is faithful, and human beings, we sure are not. So the assumption should be the other way, I think. But
you are right. But again,
I'm not saying I always make it. I can relate to your experience.
But isn't God's response to Joshua? I mean, it's direct, but it's also merciful. God's response, like, I'm not saying I can't sympathize with Joshua. I can certainly see myself there. The question I'm trying to ask is what did Joshua do right here? What did he do wrong here? How can we learn from it? And like God's response to him, he doesn't smack Joshua around really. He does tell him to get up, and he tells him to address the problem. That there is a kind of even though it's direct, even though he just tells him like get up, stop praying, someone sinned. It's kind of a direct but merciful at the same time.
And I appreciate that. And not that we're looking for leadership advice from any particular person here, but I think that's a good leadership. Listen, get up, we're going to fix this and let's move on. We don't need to dwell on it. Maybe I desire to have a little bit more empathy towards Joshua. But
well, like we talked about in our last episode, I do too. I want to have empathy. That doesn't mean that I want to read these narratives because I like Joshua. I think Joshua is a good leader. I think he is intended to be revealed as, he's been faithful all along. That's why he's been put in this position. I anticipate that as we continue to see the rest of Joshua's life unfold, that he will be more faithful than unfaithful. However, as Micah just said, like, are there things that we can learn? I'm not a perfect leader. And so if I can learn from this, that in the times when I'm disappointed with maybe outcomes or surprised by outcomes, or I feel like maybe God isn't doing what he said, instead of me coming to God and saying, God, you've let me down and you've failed and you're intending something wrong, why don't I go ahead and check inwardly first, or maybe check and say, well, what about maybe the people that we're leading? Have we been unfaithful to you? I feel like that should be at least on my checklist of agenda. I should probably go there first before I start attributing unfaithfulness to God. And that is not a natural tendency of mine. And you guys know part of my story anyway. One of the reasons why I hated Christianity in the first place was because I very much accused God of being unfaithful. I didn't respond as well as Joshua did here. I just, turned away from Christianity and hated God because I thought he let me down. As it turned out, God hadn't let me down. I was just I was the one who was confused. So I can relate to a lot of that. And of course, that's my baggage, not Joshua's baggage. And I can understand why he did this. And I'm not trying to be ungracious to him. So I always do appreciate your desire to be kind and empathetic. I wish you were always that desirous to be kind and empathetic to us on this call. But anyway, at least to the people in Scripture, you are consistent about that. And I do genuinely appreciate that about you. So I hope it doesn't come off as me being heavy-handed. I think Joshua's a good leader.
We have a desire to either make it too much about us or not about us, and stand in judgment of these people. Was he wrong? Yep. And I'm happy to learn from that, but I don't want to put myself in that position of.
Would you agree that that's the narrator's point? He tells us in verse 1, Achan sinned, did something unfaithful. Yeah. Then this bad thing happens, and Joshua then goes, God, what have you done to us? You've brought us in here to kill us. Like he's the way the narration is going, I think, is trying to bring us to that conclusion. I think, at least the way that I read it. But
and they just got done destroying Jericho with the help of God. They it literally just happened. So, but Greg, I 100% agree with you. I just simply choose to be as empathetic as I can be because I know me, and I know if I was, first of all, I wouldn't be put in Joshua's position, but if I was, it's like the human heart. The human heart shows through right here. Joshua was a righteous man, righteous in the sense that he had a right relationship with God, but he, like the human heart does, it just the inclination is to accuse God and think that the problem is not with us, but with him. So I want to be sympathetic. You guys are all right. What he did was wrong. He shouldn't have accused God. But I want to.
I've been on the wrong side of so many decisions in the past, and I'd like someone to give me an empathetic reading when they look back on the choices that I made. No, he was just dumb. He wasn't like purposefully, willfully, doing wrong things. He just didn't know. And so is he wrong? 100%. I don't want to beat upon the poor guy though. He's probably more faithful than me.
You clearly haven't read The Sin of Empathy, have you?
No, I understand that.
I'm joking.
Yeah,
with you.
no,
joking with you.
for sure. There's a ditch on both sides of the road, right? And I don't want to fall into that ditch either. But that's not the ditch that's presenting itself. So I'm going to pull myself away. You guys do whatever you want. So all right, I'm gonna
that's a blank check. I can do whatever I want.
do whatever you want. Yeah, demerits.
There are no rules.
Fortunately, I'm not in charge,
Well,
so I don't want to beat this dead horse because I feel like we have. But this is another place in the text, verse 12, where I see God presenting what we've called a disjunction. Like you could do this, or you could do this. If you don't do this, this is going to happen. So, verse 12, this is the Lord speaking. I will not be with you any longer unless you destroy the things under the ban from your midst. So no, I'm not in the business of counting up texts to prove my point, but this is, in my eyes, just yet another example of the potentiality that not all things have been decreed from eternity past, and that they could have went, you know what? We like this stuff and we're going to hang on to it. And God went, fine, I'm doing something different now. And now all of that different doesn't get spelled out here, but I see a case for a true potential, things playing out potentially different than we know that they will. So, any thoughts on that?
I agree that this is an example. I have nothing new to add to the conversation, so we don't need to belabor it. At least I don't. But I do agree that this is another one of those verses that I tend to read in that way.
My mind has been the same, so I'll just I'll agree with you guys.
So I had an interesting question. I'm not sure that there's a concrete answer to it, so I'll just put that out here off the bat. I do find it interesting that, at least aside from Joshua's prayer, two sins seem to be highlighted in chapter 7 in this incident with Ai. One of which is the sin that definitively leads to their defeat, which is Achan acting inappropriately toward the things devoted to destruction, hoards them for himself, steals them, covets them. But then it's interesting, Joshua and the people of Israel's attitude toward the battle that's in front of them at Ai. They first of all they send spies to spy it out. There is a total absence of any inquiry toward the Lord, recorded here, at least recorded. There's not inquiry of the Lord about His will concerning this city that's in front of them. And then they say, oh, it's just a little one. We don't all have to go out. We can just send a fraction of our actual numbers. Do you think that there's any connection there? Do you think there's any connection, but other than just chronological, like these things are happening at the same time? Do you think that there's a substrata that connects those two sins together? I know it's kind of speculative, but I wanted to hear you guys' thoughts.
I think that's a very interesting question. I'm not sure that I would view the second one as a sin. Clearly, the sin of Achan is a sin. I mean, the text is very clear about that. But the maybe more presumptuous nature of going up to the battle, I'm not sure about that. Certainly, if they did inquire of the Lord, it seems to me, and of course it doesn't read this way, so I'm speculating, but it seems to me that if they had inquired of the Lord, that the Lord would have said, do not go up against them, I'm not with you, because someone has taken some stuff under the ban or something like that, and they would have dealt with the sin first. However, I would think, like, practically speaking, they had this instruction to go in and to conquer, and so I don't know that they would need to go in every single step along the way say, God, do you still want us to do this? It seems like until that task was completed, that they had the, I don't know, sometimes people call it like the unction or the mandate or whatever to like go ahead and carry out this thing until it's completed. So, I know it's not a perfect analogy, but if I told my kids to like go up and clean their room and then, clean the upstairs or something like that, if they cleaned their room and then said, hey, Dad, do you want me to still clean the upstairs? I would be annoyed by that. Like, yeah, don't ask me. Like, just do the thing I told you to do. And until I give you some different instruction, I wouldn't expect you to do otherwise or to change the course. So I guess I don't necessarily view their going up against Ai as a presumption. I view it as a continuing on in the mandate that they were already given. And then the the fact that God wasn't with them showed them very clearly something is off here. That's why they inquired of the Lord. But had they inquired of the Lord, it would have resolved it before there was loss of life, I would have thought.
Just to maybe frame it a little bit differently. Maybe not the going up against, like, okay, maybe we take it as a given. Like, you're supposed to go up against AI, but there's also there's supposed to be a continual reliance upon the Lord, even in those things that they have been mandated to do. So specifically how they are to go up. God gave them special instructions for Jericho. He will eventually give them special instructions for when they do conquer AI. He's going to give them their battle plan. My question is more of, should they have paused, taken the time, inquired of the Lord about how they were going to go about this? But there does seem to be something presumptuous about, no, not all of us have to go there, right?
Yeah.
Like, not all of us have to go.
Yeah, that's fair. Not the what to do, but the how to do it. That's interesting. Go ahead.
I'm going to agree with you. Like, and this is a very subjective statement I'm about to make. I feel like the narrative almost is trying to point out that there wasn't an inquiry. Hey, they came and they advised this, and we did. Really, since when are they your advisors? Kind of question, right? And maybe that's something I'm reading in the text. So I agree with, just slightly different from what Joe said. Almost everything he says I would fall in line with, except that maybe there is something pointing to some reliance on counselors that weren't ever put in that position. To answer your question, well, first of all, I don't want to say that these sins are connected, because I'm not like Joe. I don't know that they're a sin. And if they were meant to be connected, I would like the text to say, look, these are connected. If I start trying to make those connections as I'm reading that aren't explicitly told, or at least implicitly told, I can kind of go anywhere. And so, were they wrong? Yes. I don't want to say that there was causation or that there was some spiritual connection between these things. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that they're connected, except, as you say, chronologically. This happened at the same time that this happened.
Okay. What about you, Eric?
Yeah, I didn't notice a connection there. That doesn't mean there's not one. But I just hadn't thought about that. But your earlier point about seeking the how, like how to conquer these lands, I think that's a great point. And after you said that, I thought that's probably true. So I would think that that would be a reasonable approach. We've seen that consistently. Like, God will say, you're to engage the enemy this way, and they did, and when they did, it worked. And we'll see more of that in later texts. But I thought that was a great point. I don't think I can argue with that.
And like Joe said, I'm sure he's right. If they had went and asked the Lord would have went, nah. And so that does seem to stand out there to me.
So I find it interesting that, like, both of these things happen with the sort of immediately in the past, this renewal of the covenant having taken place. They're supposed to be a people having renewed their covenant with the Lord. Now they're going into the land and taking. They're supposed to be people with the utmost God consciousness, right? They are supposed to have an awareness of the presence and the leading of the Lord with them as their covenant God. And that, yet so soon, there's these two instances that both kind of, I think, demonstrated God forgetfulness. Now, that's a very broad connection. In the same sense, any sin can be, is God forgetfulness, and it's me at the center, right? So it's not necessarily that tight of a connection between the two, but perhaps that's like something the narrative's pointing out. Like, they've just had this covenant renewed for them. They're going into the land to take it. They have God's promises. They're supposed to be aware of his presence and his leading and his protection, like all of these things. And yet there's these two instances back to back leading to defeat that demonstrate that they're kind of already tending to forget.
I wonder what would have happened if Achan hadn't done this, and yet they followed the battle strategy that was suggested. I have no reason to think that the first battle for AI wouldn't have been successful if Achan hadn't done this. And so then would it not be a sin? So, I mean, and I
So
know
this
that's complete speculation, but why wouldn't it? Because God never addresses, hey, you didn't ask me before doing this.
Yeah.
The root of the divine opposition here is because of Achan taking the things under the ban. And so, yeah, it's an interesting thought experiment with no real answer at the end, I don't think.
So this is it's a theme that's repeated, because later in chapter 9, with this incident with Gibeon, in verse 14, the narration makes a deliberate statement that says they did not inquire of the Lord. It appears that this is coming up again and again. So that's what makes me think maybe this is where the narrator is taking us. Like they're forgetting already. I don't know. It's hard to pinpoint, but
Just as Greg was talking about with the last conversation we were having, of course, we can all relate to what, Joshua did. I can relate to, forgetting, as much as I try and saturate my mind in the scriptures, I very easily default to just doing things based on what seems right to me and what makes the most sense to me. And I don't stop to inquire of the Lord for every single decision. Like, did you guys, when you're getting ready this morning, say, Lord, I'm about to put my socks on. Should I put on the left or the right first? And, how should I do it? Should I ball it up first, or should I just try and stick my foot through the street?
God's told me to get dressed.
So we when it becomes clear in the text, they should have asked about this. And in hindsight, sometimes you go, we should have, and they should have. But the difficulty of living a life of constantly inquiring of the Lord, again, is just one that I can relate to. And I'm not using that to excuse it, but very much related to what Greg was saying before. And so, we'll talk about that Gibeonite thing in chapter 9 in this conversation. And that is an interesting potential connection. There it is made explicit. Here it isn't. And so Greg's thought experiment is an interesting one that I certainly don't have an answer to. It does seem like God is honing in on of course, what Achan did as the prescription in this particular case, but it is perhaps planting a seed for what is about to come just a few chapters later, where there isn't unfaithfulness in the sin, but there is unfaithfulness in the failing to inquire before they make a decision and make a deal with a group that potentially could be sin. And in that particular case, right, again, we'll save the conversation for that when we get there, so I don't want to run ahead.
One last thing, then we'll move on. I just wonder, and I'm trying to look at the practical side of this also. They just had this victory in Jericho, and sometimes when you have a victory and your emotions are just so strong, like you're feeling great, you're confident. It's so easy to just rush into the next thing, assuming that it's all going to work out, and maybe there's some of that going on too, where it's like, well, hey, we just conquered Jericho miraculously. What can't we do now? So let's just rush in and just get these people AI out of here real quick.
Especially, considering the difference between fortified Jericho and at least by the assessment, relatively weaker AI. So it's all reasonable, I think.
Yeah,
wrong, but reasonable.
So my question is dealing with the way in which Achan was put to death, because according to verse 15, the one who was found guilty of taking things under the ban was to be burned with fire, it says. So is there any precedent of this type of punishment in the law? How was this carried out? In other words, is this a surprising way to deal with somebody? And how is this? Is this a command to burn somebody alive? Like, what? I just was kind of struck by the nature of this punishment. So what do you guys think about it?
We do see some traditional practice, at least in Genesis 38, where Judah calls for Tamar to be burned. Right now, whether or not that's a prescriptive thing, but at least it was a known practice even back then. Leviticus 20, we see a prescription from the Lord in the law to burn a man who would marry both a woman and her mother. So we see that. As far as it goes, like, is this to be understood, burn them alive? I'm just going to trust that the text gives us enough information. We don't see the details, the mechanics of burn alive or burn after we're dead, until we get to the point where it says they did it. They stoned them with stones. Once they were dead, they burned them. And because the Lord never comes back and says, hey, you did that wrong, instead, the fierceness of the Lord's anger turned away from them because they did it they did this and they did it in this manner, I'm going to just trust that that's the Lord accepting whether they were supposed to burn them alive or kill them first and then burn them alive. What they did was this, and God seemingly was his anger was expiated, if we want to use the big words there. God, his justice was satisfied based upon what they did. So I'm just going to trust that that is what God intended.
So there could also be a ceremonial significance to the burning. Once again, I don't think that the image is burning them alive so much. I think they stoned them. Then, I mean, they did stone them. I think that they were probably dead, and then they burned them. I have no way of knowing that.
Yeah, they stoned them with stones, and then, yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah. So the burning of them could be because it says that he had taken the things that were devoted to destruction, right? He had taken the things that were ceremonially unclean. They were part of the ban. They were the things that were supposed to be put to destruction and destroyed as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. Perhaps this is, Achan having given himself over to those things. This is sort of like ceremonial insignificance. Well, okay, you're part of the whole burnt offering then. Perhaps it's something like that. I don't know that for sure, but it at least it's a possibility.
Any thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, I think these guys covered it well. I mean, it seems as we do get to the end of this chapter that, at least as I understand stoning, they would have been dead from that, then they were burned, and then they were, they piled over them. So what the significance of that, I've heard some people try and tie this to cremation or other things like that. I think doctrines have been built off this. I'm not sure that I would be comfortable with going with all of that, but it seems like similar to the conversation that we talked about with hanging someone on a tree, like we talked about from Deuteronomy, which we'll get to again, that this kind of desecration of somebody afterwards is making a strong statement of divine displeasure. And but as a mode of death itself, it seems like both the burning with fire and the hanging on a tree could be done after a person was dead. It might not actually be the mode of killing, but as a strong statement of divine disfavor after the person is dead. So that's probably the most direct thoughts I have on this.
Or perhaps there's something in verse 26 here that would indicate why they were burned. And they raised over him a great heap of stones that remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his burning anger. Therefore, to this day, the name of the place is called the Valley of Achor. Burning anger is ascribed to God here. Perhaps
in the NASB, it's fierceness of his anger. So
okay, well, I guess we'd have to do a word study then. But if burning anger was accurate, perhaps God is making a point to them through the fire about how he, relates to sin.
Yeah. I agree with just about everything you guys said. I think the most natural reading of verse 25 is to assume that they were stoned to death first and then burned. And there's a sense in which if you burn a corpse, it's like you're saying, these people aren't worthy of, proper burial. They're not worthy of a respectful burial the way that, an ordinary person is. And it was like a reminder. I think it was the stones are meant to be a memorial. This is what happens if you disobey God in the way that was done by Achan. So that was, I guess, my thoughts aren't very profound on it, but that's about as far as I would take it. All right, are we ready for chapter 8? Okay. So Joe had mentioned this earlier, but I noticed that in verse 29 it says, "He hanged the king of Ai on a tree until evening, and at sunset Joshua gave command, and they took his body down from the tree and threw it at the entrance of the city gate, and raised over it a great heap of stones that stands to this day." There's this heap of stones again. So what do you guys think of this hanging on the tree? Why is this significant? Why was this done? What are your thoughts?
I'll just say, because I kind of already we talked about it in Deuteronomy 18. There's this, is it 18?
I think 21.
Okay, yeah. This kind of almost strange law, but it talked about whoever is hanged on a tree is accursed of God. And so this seems to be in accordance with that they are showing that this person that they've executed is under the curse of God, and then they take him down, at nightfall, which is according to that law. So this seems very explicitly tied to that.
Yeah, and I think Joe's previous statements about a visual demonstration or public display of this person being unfavored by the Lord, judgment of God, I think those are all applicable in this too. So.
Yep, I have nothing to add.
Okay, well, at the end of this chapter, we read about Joshua reading all the commands of Moses to this assembly. One of the things that I don't know, am interested in as we go throughout Scripture is kind of building a theology of families. I know that a lot of people talk about, the patriarchy and how people were excluded from various things, but here we see this congregation of, women and even the young children and the strangers being read the law. So, Greg, you asked a question not that long ago about, every 7 years, everybody going and the whole group coming. Now again, we're seeing a full multitude that everybody is there. There's no exception. Seems like these young kids, there's no desire to separate them. They want everybody together. Do you guys have any thoughts or implications about this? I mean, the narrative tells us that they did it. I don't know that we're supposed to draw any implications, but the detail is there, and they explicitly recorded this for us. So any thoughts that you have about what happens at the end of this chapter here?
Yeah, as a guy who is all in on family integrated worship and worshiping as a family, not kicking kids out of the service so they can go do kiddie church or whatever it is that they're doing. This is another one of those examples where I want to go, here, look. I don't believe that that's the point that's trying to be made by the Bible here. But this is yet another example of, at these moments of importance, these moments of the people gathering, nobody's excused. Like the entire people are gathered, the congregation of the Lord are gathered there to do this thing. And I see no warrant, and maybe this is anywhere else in Scripture. This is to do what we're doing today in many cases. And so this is just another stone in that wall of defense that I would use for why are we doing what we're doing?
I know what you mean, but what are you talking about doing what we're doing?
Oh yeah. Again, the idea that you show up at church on Sunday morning and the 2 to 4 year olds go over there and they have church for them, and they have church, this group has church for them, and we split up, and the whole separating families into age appropriate units to receive whatever is age appropriate based upon our understanding, whatever that is, for that age group. And so, my 5, 6, and 7 year olds go here and they do this, and the little kids go there, and I just don't see any prescription for that. I see, this is just again another example, families, entire units, the congregation of the Lord showing up to do this thing. And if we say, again, modern context, if we say the church, the gathering of God's people are supposed to do that, gather together and worship the Lord together, I don't understand, I cannot be convinced of why do we say, yeah, we're going to be together, but as soon as we're together, we're going to split up and not be together and go do separate things? It makes no sense to me.
I'm very interested in hearing these other guys' perspective as well, because you and I know are very similar on this. But do you think that there's any, like some could say, yes, we don't see that being broken up here. However, maybe this is the exception rather than the rule. That's why it's being stated, and okay, so it's being done on an every 7 year basis. Here, this is being done because of this unique event, and yeah, they didn't break it up. But when we don't hear this description every single time, that maybe the assumption is that there is more age appropriateness going on or something like that. Or sure. Is there any merit to a thought like that?
That's a fair argument. The fact that God is saying, listen, absolutely no one is excused under any circumstance here, and absolutely no one under any circumstances here. As we go throughout the text, we're going to find these instances where we go, listen, no one for any reason is exempt from this. Is that automatically an argument for whatever we've decided today, breaking everyone up? Well, that's an argument completely from silence. And so I would see this the highlight of absolutely everyone being more about no one's excused than it is about, you can do whatever you want, however you want to do it any other time, but these times, this is more about the importance of what's happening here and now, not about a license to do whatever you want every other time.
Yeah, so I'll make one last statement about this, and then again, I'm curious to hear these other guys' thoughts. When I think of like what we already read in Deuteronomy, I think chapter 4, verse 2, and Deuteronomy 12, verse 32, there was this prohibition or exhortation, or to not add to or take away to any of the words that are here. Now we see everybody together; they're hearing all of it together without any effort to say, well, the kids can't understand this, or they're too young to understand this. I think that they're laying a foundation from a young age, and that's why I have concerns about children's Bibles or whatever else that kind of they decide, well, the kids can't handle this, so we'll get rid of that part. Here I see something that is different. I think that ideally, yes, it's true that kids won't get everything out of it, but my goodness, what adult gets everything out of it? So do we want to separate even the adults out until you have, who can say that they get everything out of? I mean, aren't all of us getting more out of this as we're going through this process again? And we're all, of a mature age, and most of us are credentialed Bible teachers, and yet still we can get more out of it as we go through it together. So anyway, I don't know. I'm always on alert when I see statements like this. I don't think it's the exception. I do think it's the rule. I think that we kind of get the idea that they were together, and that's been very influential to me. But anyway, what else? The rest of you guys, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on a statement like this in Scripture.
So I think that. So we don't, for the record, we do family integrated worship. Yeah, we don't separate the kids out.
I thought you guys did. You don't have like a youth group or children's programs or anything like that?
Nope.
Huh.
No, especially not on Sunday mornings. I'm not against the idea of like if the youth wanted to gather we wanted to gather the youth in a Bible study on Wednesday night or something. Like I'm not against that. But on the Lord's Day worship services, these things which we've been definitively commanded to do. No, like everyone's going to be there with their families. But
I'm not sure why I thought that you didn't. Can I ask one more follow-up question before you go?
Yeah.
Is it, you've mentioned that you're a smaller church. Is it a product of the size? Like if you had more youth, do you think you would move in the direction, or would you maintain the family integrated regardless of how large you got and how many, kids and families might be there?
Yeah, no, we're convictionally family integrated. So
I'm not sure why I didn't know that.
Maybe you
shame
are
on me.
saved. I take away my presumption.
Whoa! At one point, there was not a lot of young families. As far as like kids that would traditionally be in a children's church or something like that, there wasn't many. Now, like the church is growing, so like we're having a little bit more growing pains with regard to like young families training their children. Like we're gonna have to start reserving the back 2 rows for dads that have to haul their kids out of here every 30 minutes.
It happens. You're doing pretty good if it's only every 30 minutes.
I'm literally putting signs up. This is the aisle. This is the aisle for the parents who have to haul their kids out all the time. Going back to the argument, the hypothetical argument from the pro children's church camp that Joe mentioned. Someone who wants to say, oh, well, this is the exception to the rule. The rule, generally speaking, should be that we should have age-appropriate stuff. Well, okay, you still have to establish the rule somewhere. Like, if this is the exception, okay, I'll entertain that for a second. Where do you find the rule?
That's what I say. It's an argument from silence, right?
Right, it's an argument from silence. Where do you find the rule? You don't find the rule of segregation anywhere.
And age appropriateness is only defined by our modern evolutionary theories anyway. Like who decides, that 3 and 5 are best versus, 5 and 7, right? Who gets to decide that?
Or, there are churches who have separate services literally during the normal worship service. There are churches that have separate services for their teenagers when that age group is almost totally a modern construction. Like the adolescent age group is almost totally a modern construction. These people would have been considered some type of adult in the ancient world with the
15, 16,
Respons-
17 year olds are
with
either
the
adults or they're
responsibilities.
children, but
Yeah, with the responsibilities that attend adulthood, they certainly wouldn't have had something else. They would have been attending, in later times, synagogue and things like that. With, I mean, if you're a 16 or 17-year-old, maybe with your own family at that point. I don't know. Like, it's a distinctly modern thing, and it's driven by our consumeristic impulses. And if someone wants to go to the Bible and say, well, how you guys are doing it is the exception rather than the rule, you're going to have a really hard time definitively proving that. At best, you could try to make the point that the scriptures don't actually intend to teach that one way or the other is right.
That's what I was going to say. You would have, if you're going to argue in an honest manner, you just have to argue for some sort of normative principle versus regulative. Yep. These examples aren't meant to be examples that we have to follow. They're just the way we did it. Now we have license to do it however we think is best. Yep. It's your best argument. I don't know that it's one
it's
that
not a
I
good
would.
One.
Not in my opinion. It's not convincing to me, right? But I tend to be a little bit more regulative than the next guy. So
it's interesting that a lot of passages that we read in the narrative, I don't think that they're intended to answer modern questions, because you guys both hit on it. This segregation stuff seems to have only popped up relatively recently in history. So like we don't read about them, reading the Bible on their cell phones or something like that. It's just not an issue that was in their mind. And I just don't think it ever entered their mind to separate everybody. I think they just thought everybody should be together. And so not that it was regulative or normative or it's just that's what we did because that's what we always do, because why wouldn't we? We're the people of God and we'd be gathered together. So, but Micah, you made a strong point. You would need to establish a precedent of segregation outside of modern experience. And I've just never heard a good case for that. But Eric, you haven't piped in. We'd love to hear your thoughts as well. I don't know if you're on the same page or if you view it differently. Interested to hear your thoughts as well.
My previous church, we did have a youth group. We did separate, as you guys are mentioning. And in all honesty, the reason why we did that is simply because I never considered doing anything else. I really hadn't even looked into this issue. I was, I guess, preoccupied with other things. This was not an area that I studied. It was really, youth group the youth ministry was on my radar, but the distinction between segregation and keeping everybody together, I just simply never really thought much about it, to be honest with you. Now it's interesting in Israel too. Boys were circumcised on the 8th day, and that. It seems like having it done that early implies that there was this expectation, not that an 8-day-old baby could know what was going on, but just that from very early on they were committed to obeying the law of God, and it was supposed to be kind of built into them from a very young age. So I think that I think kids, while they don't probably have they don't have the capacity to understand certain things that an adult has, and some adults don't have much capacity either. But
hey, come on, man, be nice. This is what God looking right. This is what God made me.
I didn't have you in mind, Greg.
I know he was.
But I see in Scripture, I see that children are supposed to be taught from a young age, from as young as possible, and I see that repeated again and again. We've referred back to Deuteronomy 6, where it talks about teach these things to your children, that is the things in the law. So yeah, I think kids should be learning the kinds of things that adults are learning, although maybe not at the same level. But I think that it's the parents' responsibility, really, that should be the one that to teach the kids. So that seems reasonable.
It's an interesting thing that we, at least in the circles that I run in, we are very happy to baptize a 6-year-old based upon some credible profession of faith, which I'm not arguing against. But then to go, oh, you belong over here. You don't belong with, God's gathered mature people, I suppose, is the argument. So I'll be interested to see, do we ever see children's temple? Do we ever see children's synagogue? Do we ever see anything that would give us that, send us down that path as we continue on through Scripture?
So I have a follow-up question on this, and Greg, we'll keep our eyes open for that. I'm maybe most interested in Micah just because I'm familiar, I was surprised. Like I said, I don't know why I had in my mind that you didn't do this, but I imagine maybe your experience has been similar to mine. If it hasn't, I'd love to hear that. One of the main reasons why people have left our local congregations is because they don't like the family integrated thing and they want the children's programs. And I've heard that they don't see, fruit from their kids. You mentioned these parents that need to get up and leave the service all the time. It just becomes too difficult, so they'd much rather it be much easier that instead of one of them being out with their kids, they just have somebody else be dedicated to missing the entire service so they can drop their kids off with them so that they can sit in the service. They have no care that somebody else has to take care of their kids and miss church, but for them to do it, it's too much, and so they got to go somewhere else. And I hear these types of objections all the time. I'd be curious, just pastorally, what do you say? I know what I say, but what do you say, or do you not see that? Does everybody just kind of stick with you guys and say, oh yeah, this is great, we love it when the babies are crying during the worship time or prayer time, or you're preaching and the babies are squawking and I can't hear what you're saying. That's my favorite thing in the world. What do you? How do you deal with that pastorally? I'm not again asking about any particular individuals. Just we mentioned in this episode already, it's sometimes things are reasonable but maybe wrong. I mean, I very much understand why people segregate. It's way cleaner. It's way easier, to have the kids that want to run around and be goofballs, just fill them with goldfish and graham crackers and let them watch VeggieTales or something and leave everybody else alone so we can focus. But is that better? And if it isn't, when someone says, well, I'm not seeing fruit because my kid's just rolling around like a cat in the aisle and that doesn't get anything out of church, I want to bring them somewhere where they can at least learn that God made the clouds or something. Like what do you say to people like that? Or is this not something that you deal with? Is this just a unique Joe problem and not a Micah problem?
I say, suck it up, Buttercup.
Again, that compassion and empathy just streaming out of you.
It's just oozing out of it.
Funny enough, because I don't attend a family integrated church, we are one of the very few who keep their kids. I don't know, I might be the only one that's convictionally family integrated, but we have more interruption from 70-year-olds who don't know how to turn their volume off their phone, and so the phone's ringing in the middle of church. I'm more irritated by that than I am the kids squawking.
And they're picking up the phone and talking.
Oh, they've done it.
I can't talk in the church.
I've seen it.
I'll call you back.
I'm in church. I'll call you later. Like, oh my goodness.
We're right in the middle of the sermon.
It has happened.
He's talking about Achan.
Yeah. Is that really your approach?
In all seriousness,
yeah.
No, in all seriousness, I haven't. Okay, most of the time when people come to a Reformed Baptist church, they know what they're getting into. Most Reformed Baptist churches, I think, because of the formalized view of the regulative principle of worship, the confessional view of the regulative principle of worship, there's not a whole lot of people that just wander into a Reformed Baptist church that don't already have some.
Are you suggesting that family integration is typically expressed in Reformed Baptist churches?
In most of the circles that I run in, it is.
Really?
So that's been my experience.
That's gaining. Then I would have to assume that is gaining ground because I don't think in the last 30 years that's been historically true.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so I've only been in formally been in our world for, like 4 years. Okay. So, but in the most of the churches that we're sister churches with, most of the churches that I have other connections with, like the church in New Jersey that Pastor Calvin was trained in. He was trained at Trinity Ministerial Academy there under Al Martin. Like they did family integrated worship, and most of the people that were trained there, like those are the kind of the circles that I'm in. Yeah. So most of the people that were trained there went and planted churches or sort of pastoring churches that then took that on as their practice. Not all of them did. I mean, we have one sister church that definitely does it differently than us, and we still, we have a close relationship with them still. But
there is an oddity in Reformed Baptist, right? Because often when you say Reformed, you're talking Calvinistic, and so the Dutch Reformed that I'm used to on the west side of the state very much holds to a baptizing of infants, and therefore wouldn't be Reformed Baptist. And so maybe it's just my experience in the in the Dutch Reformed vein versus the Reformed Baptist vein. So
Okay. Would you say in the Dutch Reformed vein on the west side of the state, they're definitely doing all this other stuff?
Yeah, I mean it is hard, and by hard I mean I couldn't find a family integrated church within 30 minutes of me with whom I could agree with enough, of the basics and the importances and stuff that I could worship at. And so that's why I worship happily and peacefully and in unity with a church that is not practicing family integration.
They're at least not anti.
They're not, yeah, and that was my thing, right? Like, because there are that I know of, family integrated churches around me, I had to go and knock on the door and say, listen, I'm not asking you to change your mind. I won't evangelize on family integration, but you have to be willing to tolerate me, because I have walked into churches where like, your baby's not allowed. This is not the place for your baby. Take your baby out of here now. Drop them off at the nursery, and then you're welcome back. So I've had hostile might be a stretch, but close to hostile is more my experience.
We talked a lot about this in a dedicated episode, but I mean, Micah, you have any other last thoughts? Of how you do you instruct people? Is it better to go through these growing pains or I know suck it up buttercup probably isn't what you actually say to people. So no. I'm curious again if you can maybe tie a bow on that before we move forward.
Yeah. So what I actually say to people is you need to be aware that it's going to be really, really hard. And you have to also trust that it's going to be worth it, because this is what God expects of you. Now, for the person that says, I'm not seeing any fruit from this, to me, that this is maybe not something I would address immediately in that conversation, but pastorally down the road, I'd probably address why you're not seeing fruit in your kid and why you expect that fruit to primarily come from the, whatever you think kids ministry is supposed to be doing in your child's life. Like, are you talking to your kids about the things of the Lord when you lie down, when you rise up, when you go on the way? Are you talking to your kids about the Lord, or are you talking to them about football most of the time, and then Sundays when you get some Jesus in, because if you're not seeing fruit in your kid's life, that probably says more about your parenting than it says about our philosophy of ministry.
And what fruit are you expecting from your 4-year-old?
What fruit are you? Secondly,
oh, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. What kind of? How do we measure the fruit? Exactly.
I'm not. I mean, their enjoyment, their entertainment in a children's church thing is not a fruit that I particularly care about. Now, are they entertained? Yay, I guess, but that's not that's not where I'm trying to. It's not the fruit I'm trying.
Well,
to measure.
maybe the fruit, like we're talking about younger kids. Maybe the fruit is just exposing a child to this worship gathering,
to foundational things.
And we're saying
I'm not
this
asking
is
for fruit. I'm trying to lay down roots right now. So let the fruit come when they're 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. Right now we're planting seeds right now. We're building foundations. And so what fruit is it you want?
You're cultivating appetites, right? Because if you have them doing something in a different way where they're just getting all their fleshly, they're scratching all the fleshly itches for entertainment and snacks and whatever. Like if you're doing it that way up until the point when the child is whatever age, 12, 15, 17, if you're doing it that way, and then you expect them to have the appetite for corporate worship among God's people.
Why would you expect that?
Why would you expect that? You haven't cultivated that appetite. So that's it. Just the whole philosophy to me is flawed. And just I experienced an interesting example of the kind of, I mean, it's not necessarily fruit in the sense that I think that she's saved, but it is fruit in the sense of the things of God have been talked about with her. The other day I was talking to my daughter about Jesus before bed. And we talked about, how we can live with Jesus after we die, how we can have eternal life. We're talking about that. And I said something about heaven, and she said, "Oh, where Grandpa Philip is." And I was like, "Okay, have you been talking to Granny?" And she was like, "Yeah." She was like, "Grandpa Philip's in heaven. He believed in Jesus." And I was like, yeah, I think he is. And but it was just it kind of put an exclamation point on this to me, that those kind of conversations like she's having with us, or she's having with my grandma, that my grandmother, this is her great grandmother, my grandmother, when we go over and visit my parents, that I don't even know are happening. I think those are the things that you're going to see bear an enormous amount of fruit in your child's life, not watching Veggie Tales.
Yeah.
You know,
the questions they ask, the comments they make, at least in all of my kids, save my 3-year-old. My 3-year-old isn't grabbing on, but my 6-year-old sitting there in service, the pastor says something in the sermon. He goes, well, what does that mean? Or why are we doing this? Or why are we doing communion? Or what? That's the fruit that I expect from a 6-year-old, not righteous and holy living unto the Lord, because guess what? He's 6, and he's a boy, and so like that's a little bit too much to ask at this discipline, yes, but righteous and holy living, it's not the fruit I'm expecting.
I have one last observation. I think I'm in full agreement with everything you guys are saying. The statistics of people raised in youth group turning away from the Lord and walking away are horrifying. And I don't know that it's much better in family integrated churches, but at least they're not demanding to be entertained constantly and be shown videos and be filled with snacks. They have been exposed to this. And so, at least in our local church, so far in our existence, as far as I know, 100% of our kids that have graduated, from high school or whatever, are still walking faithfully with the Lord. That's an amazing percentage. And I doubt it'll remain that way if we get to go on for decades and decades, but at least for now. But one of the other things tied to this is, especially in a long service with kids, it just becomes oppressive over time. This assembly, it says there was, verse 35, there was not a word of all that Moses had commanded, which Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, with the women and the little ones and the strangers who were living among them. I get the sense this was a long service. And I imagine it was probably, somewhat chaotic, a little messy. They're probably, if all the little ones are there, people were probably getting a little restless. If we can see that they were capable of doing this, I think we should expect more of our families. And, if what we teach, at least for listen, if you're having some difficulty keeping your kids under control, I get it. Believe me, we got a lot of kids in our household, and it really does. It feels like sometimes you are trying to keep a cat under control in the pew with you, which is not, it's not particularly enjoyable. But we can be growing in those things, and we can be gracious towards one another. And, if you're a family at a time when you have a child at a challenging age who just has a bundle of energy and wants to move around, at least in our congregation, I think it's the hardest for the people who are they think they're being judged, but people aren't judging them. People are delighted that their kids are there, and they're fine with it. And the people who don't like it, they just leave. So, the people who are actually there. But anyway, I think this was a really long service. At least that's how I read it. So if you guys have other thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them. Otherwise, maybe we can move into chapter 9.
Let's go.
All right. I had a question on chapter 9, and I'll just summarize what's going on here. Fearing for their lives, the Gibeonites sought to make a covenant with Israel, and they had this very deceptive way to go about this. They took worn-out sacks and wineskins and put on worn-out sandals and clothes to make Joshua and the Israelites think that they had traveled from a country beyond Canaan, because they apparently knew that if they lived in Canaan, they were in serious trouble, which is interesting because the implication is the word that God was giving the land of Canaan to the Israelites, that word must have spread far and wide very quickly. When I say very quickly, I mean, it's true that Israel was in the wilderness for 40 years, but still, I mean, in that day and age, I mean, it just seems to me remarkable that this news spread as far as it did, and they had probably heard about Israel destroying Jericho or whatever. Anyway, they put on this deception, and the deception worked, and Joshua made a covenant with them, agreeing to let them live. He swore an oath to the Lord to let them live. But when Israel discovered that the Gibeonites had deceived them, and they actually did live close by, they refrained from killing them because of the oath previously made. So my question is, was it right for Israel to spare the Gibeonites, given that God already commanded them to annihilate them? And so why was their oath more binding than God's command?
Yeah, I think this is a good example of adding another sin on top of this other sin doesn't negate the first sin, right? Yeah, God told them don't do this. And in an ill-advised, unadvised way, they went ahead and did this. They swore an oath before the Lord. Reneging on that isn't going to undo the fact that they made the bad decision and they're in this bad situation. So it would just be compiling sin upon sin. And so now they have to live with these consequences. And what is the best that they can make out of this, this bad situation? Well, apparently it was this arrangement. And so, there's lots of ways that we can tell ourselves, oh, I did this thing wrong. So if I go and do this, even though that's wrong, I can make it right. 2 wrongs don't make a right. 3 wrongs don't make a right. 15 wrongs don't make a right. So going down that path, you're just stuck with the consequences. And so let's make the most God-honoring choice moving forward, not trying to undo past bad decisions with more bad decisions.
Do you guys think that there's any, like an oath that is sworn upon false pretenses? Do you think that invalid, because an oath is a kind of contract or a kind of compact or covenant. Do you think that invalidates the oath? And is there a possibility that they should have, I mean, maybe there's not the possibility that they should have gone back on it, but does that invalidate the oath that was made or no?
In my reasoning, yeah, like in my logic, if I were the one orchestrating them, like, they lied to me, forget them, kill them all. But
I think it depends.
It doesn't seem to be
too.
how the text handles it, and so
yeah, I think as I read this, I got the impression that going back on this oath would have been a very serious matter, maybe, and I think even worse than failing to annihilate them, because in Leviticus 19:12 it says, "You shall not swear falsely by my name," that's the Lord, "so as to profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." So it could be, and it seems to be, that profaning the name of God by going against this oath was actually worse than failing to annihilate the Canaanites. So I think that in this particular case, under these circumstances, it seems to me like Joshua and everybody else kind of, because the elders were, I think, getting involved with this, this too. It sounds like they all came to the same conclusion. One thing we cannot do is break our oath, because if we break our oath, we're profaning the name of the Lord, and that's even worse than our previous sin.
But yeah.
So is it the fact that there was some kind of the fact that it was an oath that bound them in some kind of a covenant relationship with the name of God over it? Like, is that the reason why this couldn't be? So I guess it's
to me, that's kind of what it seems like, because Leviticus says, if you swear by my name and then you don't keep your word, you are profaning my name. Now, if it's, I don't know that every agreement would work that way. Like if it's just kind of a casual,
like that was the point that I was going to make. It seems like there's more verticality to this agreement. Like this isn't just between you and me. Are we making this agreement? But this is between you and me and the Lord. And so now, if God decides to deal harshly with the Gibeonites, that's it's God's business. He'll work that out. But I have, in the name of the Lord, bound myself to this. I don't get to back myself out of it because you were wrong, is how I read it.
Yeah, this is a great question. It's very complicated. I think the laws that you're pointing to, I mean, they explicitly say that in verses 18 and 19 as they're discussing this. I mean, we've sworn by the Lord, so we can't go back on this. But, I mean, think of the potential application, right? You just say, oh, I've sworn by the Lord that I'm going to be a drunkard, or I'm going to be an adulterer or a murderer or something like that. And I guess I can't go back on it because I did this. So like this, the intention of that law can't be to say that, well, as long as I swear by the name of the Lord, it would be worse. That's the worst sin, and that allows me to do any other sin, on the back end of this. And so, Micah, your initial question, I mean, certainly the false pretenses, they never would have sworn by the Lord in this case had they been told the truth, because they would have destroyed them. And so they know for a fact that they were being dealt with in bad faith. And I'm not sure if it is just my modern understanding. Like if you were in any kind of contract, if you were coming at it with the best of intentions and then the other party just acknowledged, yeah, we just lied right up front because we had, we knew you wouldn't do it unless we lied directly to you. Like, well, you're dealing in bad faith. Of course, this contract is nullified, and I wouldn't lose a minute of sleep for going back on my word on that. So there's a lot that's going on here, and I don't think this will be the last time we'll see something like this where people swear an oath or make an oath by the name of the Lord. I would think And as far as I know, maybe I missed it. I'm trying to look at it again. But they don't. Not only did they not inquire with the Lord before making this, but they don't inquire to the Lord to say, Lord, we've made this thing, but we ought, like, don't they just
do
reason in their mind, saying, well, we can't go back on it? I wonder, just like Greg's thought experiment from before, had they said, Lord, we should have inquired and we made this silly thing, but they lied to us. And so is it profaning your name to keep this oath, or is it profaning your name to break this oath? What do you want us to do with these lousy Gibeonites, who lied to us? I would have liked to see them deal with it like that. And I don't know what God's response would have been. I would have liked to have seen God say, well, you told them, so you might as well. Or he said, no, I already told you. And just because they lied to you doesn't mean that they get to go free. I don't know what I could speculate, but again, I don't know what the answer is. Did I miss a detail in here? But they just reasoned this on their own, right?
Yeah.
So that idea of the presumption, I would have liked, not only before they entered this agreement, I would have liked to see them inquire of the Lord after they made this agreement. Because I don't think they should have kept this deal, but the law, their desire to want to keep that law to violate another law, I don't think God's laws are like that. I don't think that one can allow you to violate another one. I don't think that's the right way of keeping the law in its totality.
In all fairness, though, and I'm not, again, I asked the question, I'm not sure exactly what to think. I kind of lean toward what I said earlier, but they did. Joshua did make the Gibeonites servants in response to their disobedience. So it wasn't like the Gibeonites were they weren't penalized for this. I mean, they paid a price for lying. So I think it could have turned out worse than it did, because they could have just been allowed to remain living and continuing on.
We'll see if this choice has any consequences, negative or positive, down the line for Israel.
I mean, Deuteronomy 20:11 said that, if there was this offer of peace, and then they could become forced laborers. So do you think that this was in fulfillment of that, Eric? Is that what you're saying, that they kind of found a middle path to say, okay, well, we should have destroyed you, or we could have destroyed you, but because now we've made this treaty, even though you tricked us into doing it, now we're fulfilling Deuteronomy 20:11. Is that what you're driving at, or?
Well, I think that it wasn't as if the Gibeonites got away with this scot-free with no consequences. Like they were punished for this. They were made laborers. Now, so I guess my point is just very simple. That is that it wasn't as if they were just allowed to continue living on and doing their own thing and totally independent of Israel. They essentially became servants. So that, to me, it was, yes, and that kind of goes back to that passage in Deuteronomy. Like, okay, well, if you're going to pretend to be from beyond the borders of Canaan, well, then we're going to treat you the way that we would treat someone who we had conquered, which goes back to Deuteronomy 20.
No, I don't think we can excuse what happens here in Joshua or how they decide to handle because of Deuteronomy 20, because we've already said that Deuteronomy 20 wasn't about the people in that particular area. It was about when you go on later. And so this Deuteronomy 20 is in no way a prescription for what should have or could have happened here.
No, it was still
short of their disobedience. Yeah.
Right. Yes. And I totally agree with that. As the text makes it very clear that they should have inquired of the Lord, like Micah was talking about earlier. They had the responsibility to inquire of the Lord before making this covenant with the Gibeonites. They didn't know these people. Obviously, they didn't. Had they known them, they would have done this to begin with. They didn't know them, and so they shouldn't have trusted them. They should have went to the Lord and said, "What should we do in this situation?" God would have said, "No, they're lying to you. Annihilate them." And that's what would have happened. So I am most certainly not defending the behavior of Joshua and the Israelites. The blame is laid on them in the text and on really nobody else.
Anybody else with anything on this, or is that going to be it for today?
Let's land the plane.
In that plane. Well, friends, that is our show on Joshua 7, 8, and 9. That's what we think. What do you think? We'd love to read your comments below. Do you agree with us? Do you disagree with us? We'd love to hear you sound off down there. If you like the episode, don't forget to click the thumbs up button. If you haven't subscribed, we got a long way to go in this Biblical Theology Project. So if you don't want to miss any more of our future episodes, which come out each week, go ahead and subscribe. I look forward to talking with these guys again next week. But until we see you again, friends, get equipped, obey your king, and glorify your God.
Really?
Suck it up, Buttercup.
Hey, come on, man, be nice.